Before we start, I have to tell you something that Cheyenne sent us. For those of you who don't know, Cheyenne is our 23-year-old daughter. If you have teenage children, you just know automatically that they're just brats. Okay, so we just know that. That's what they are when they're teenagers. And they don't care about us, and they don't really like anything we have to say, because that's just being a teenager. But when they get adults, they kind of change. So Cheyenne sent this to me, and it literally made me laugh, because this is what happens. This is the encouragement for those of you that have teenage kids. Teenage me. Mom, stop calling me. I'm busy. Leave me alone. Okay. Adult me. Hi, Mom. Stop ignoring my calls. I know we FaceTimed 15 minutes ago, but I'm calling to let you know that it's raining here and that I just drank an iced coffee. Okay, I'll call you back in 7 minutes. I'm like, that's so true. Okay, just so you know, it does get to be like that. So that's kind of good news. All right, we are working through the book of Acts. I tell you this pretty much every week. We've taken Acts and we've made it into about 5 different series. It's a huge, huge book. It's a huge undertaking. We are now on the 4th series of the 5 series, and we've called this one Outrageous Faith, because at this point in Acts, the early church has just now started. Jesus has risen from the dead. He's ascended into heaven. Now it's the disciples' job to get this message out into the world of salvation so people can go to heaven. That's kind of what this is all about. And last week we talked about Paul and Barnabas, and we talked about this church in Antioch. Today, we're going to go back to Peter and James. And it's interesting because Luke continually flip-flops between these two men in the book of Acts. But hopefully I want to talk today about seeing the bad things that happen in your life in maybe a completely new, different kind of a light. Because here's what happens when something bad happens in your life or my life. Here's our first response. We say, here's the deal. God, if you are God and can stop anything, then why don't you? And all you have to do is pick up the Bible and read it and say, you know what? God, I know you can make my situation better. I know you can get me the job. I know you can heal me. I know you can do these things, because we've seen it all through the Bible. We saw that he could part the Red Sea and have millions of people walk through it on dry land. We've seen how God fed the Israelites for 40 years, literally manna from heaven every single day. We saw Jesus heal the leper and raise the dead. And the question that we have is, so what in the world is the problem? Why won't God do that for us? When we were moving out, we had 3 offices at the time, and they were all filled with books. So we got rid of all of our books. I've been able to keep about 100 of them. So now I kept the books that are main staples in my life. One book that I came across that I never ever read, didn't even know I had, but since I found it, I read it. Here it is right here. How can a good God let bad things happen? Now, this isn't that weird book that someone wrote a long time ago about I don't even remember the name of it, but this is not it. This is a different author. His name is Mark Tabb. I read it, and then I read it for a second time, because it so helped me get a grasp on how can a good God let bad things happen. So if you're dealing with something, it's a good book. It's out of print, FYI. Go on Amazon. You can maybe find it there. In there's a story, when he first starts, of a couple, Stan and Beth, and they have 3 kids. And here is what a sheriff said. As powerful as we are, we have no control over God's hand. And the sheriff told people that because Stan and Beth and 2 of their 3 children died in a freak accident when a 10-ton, 100-year-old tree literally uprooted and fell onto their car as they were driving 40 miles an hour. How does that even happen? And Stan just happened to be a pastor of a very, very small church. At the funeral, there was 4 caskets lined up with their only surviving member of their family, which was a little 4-year-old girl. You're like, serious, God? What in the world are you thinking? The pastor said this: sometimes bad things happen to good people, and we never know why. God doesn't offer any explanations, and all we can do is trust in God and His goodness and His grace. That's what we have to learn how to do, that no matter what's going on in our life, whether it's good or whether it's bad, we have to be able to say, God, I'm just trusting you with this. I don't know why you've done this in my life, but I'm going to believe that good will come out of it. It frustrates people when they realize that you and I absolutely have no control over anything in our life or this world. And that we believe that because the Bible tells us that God is always in control. So, if that's true, and we take this back to Stan and Beth, then the question is, did God cause that to happen? Or did Satan cause it to happen? And a lot of people would say automatically, well, Satan rules the world, and so Satan was there pushing and pushing on that tree, the minute to get rid of Stan because Stan was a pastor. And a lot of people say that it's Satan's fault because they want to defend God's honor, and we would automatically say, God would never do that. But Mark explained in the book that Stan was a pastor of a very small church. Why would Satan worry about a pastor of a small church? Why doesn't he push a tree over on Billy Graham? Or Greg Laurie, or the pastor of the big churches? Why would he not do that? Why would he worry about Stan? And the question is, what does God have to do with this? And if you read the Bible, I want to talk really quickly. I think we talked about Job a little bit last week, but I want to talk about him again. Because for some reason, Job had a really, really good handle on suffering and when bad things happen and what our response should be. Because somehow, Job had this really great high view of God. And in one day, we talked about this. In one day, Job was very rich. He was very, very righteous. He loved God. He would do anything to make his kids love God. Like, he really had a heart for the things of God. And in one fell swoop, he lost everything, all 10 of his children, in one day in a freak accident, just like that tree coming down. And then a few minutes later, he lost his servants, and he lost his animals, and he lost everything in one day. And yet, Satan was never blamed by Job at all in this whole thing. Here's why. He knew this. Satan could only do this because God gave him permission. See, you and I have to really grasp that. Job understood something that we have to grasp in this life, and it's this. Job said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. He didn't say the Lord gave and Satan took away. And he didn't say the Lord gave and something bad just happened to me, so I'm going to be mad at God. He just had his whole entire life wiped out. And he said, the name of the Lord be praised. As much heartache and tragedy that came upon Job, here's the deal. He trusted that God knew what he was doing. I always say this, if we get nothing else from this Bible study, it's the one thing I want us to understand is that no matter what happens in our life, that we believe that God is in control and has a purpose for anything that happens in our life. He wants to use us on this earth to further the gospel, to get people to know about Jesus so that they can go to heaven, but more than that, so that they can get out and tell other people about salvation and how awesome it is. But I don't think Job liked what happened, and I think he was confused. But here is a verse that needs to go on our refrigerators. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? Job literally said that to his wife when she says, you need to curse God and die and just curse him. And he's like, are you joking? Why would I ever do that? Can we just say, oh, thank you, Jesus, for all the good things, and then when something bad happens, we're mad at him? He's like, we have to get this. We have to be able to say God is in charge of it all, good and bad, and we need to be okay with that. Job didn't sit around saying, God hates me. He didn't sit around asking God, for the whole book of Job, why me, why me? And he never, ever walked away from God. I want us to walk away with that kind of faith that Job has in the midst of tragedy. And so because of that, we're going to talk today about something in the Bible that seems so wrong. And when you and I come upon passages that seems like God has just lost control or that shouldn't have happened and that's just not right, I want us to always remember that verse. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? I thought this was cute. A 4-year-old boy was asked to pray before Christmas. The family members bowed their heads, and the little boy started praying thank you for, of course, Mommy and Daddy, and he named all of his friends and his animals and his grandma and grandpa and all the people in his life. And then he started on the food. Thank you for the dressing and the fruit salad and the sauce and the pies. And then he stopped. And everyone waited for him to say amen so they could eat, but instead he whispered to his mom and he said, if I thank God for the broccoli, won't he know that I'm lying? See, you got the good Cool Whip and the bad broccoli is how I think about that. But even little 4-year-olds struggle with the good and the bad. But the reason why we have a problem is because of this. We think problems, tragedy, death, and heartache are bad things. We were literally raised saying, oh, that's bad. Oh, that's bad. That should never happen. And here's what we think. God miraculously intervening is the best thing. And I'm hoping today to change your mind. Because all through the Bible and through the life of Jesus, we see this whole upside down world. He says things like, the first shall be last. Now, the world doesn't teach you that. The world says, no, I want to be first. He said, blessed are those that mourn. You're like, wait a minute, I don't want to mourn. The world says you shouldn't mourn. You should be happy all the time. Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted. And you're saying, what? I don't want to be persecuted. The world says you should never be persecuted. It's this upside down. And I'm hoping that today we will look at life a little bit different as we see that there's good and bad, and God is being in control of both of them. Robert Morgan wrote a book called The Red Sea Rules, 10 Given Strategies for Difficult Times. And he gave 3 examples, he probably gave more, I took 3 of them, of how big and powerful this God is that we have placed our trust in. And God can do anything. So he tells the first story of Kristen Claypool, and she took a missions trip to Cuba. And her whole goal was to get Spanish Bibles into Cuba where they needed Bibles at this particular time. So what she did is she took her suitcase, and instead of filling it with clothes, she put all of her clothes on, which made it look very awkward, I'm assuming, and filled her whole Bible or her whole suitcase with Bibles. But unfortunately, because of the way she was dressed, it drew attention to herself. And so at every place, airport before she got to Cuba, they literally, pulled her aside, checked her to make sure everything was okay. But when she got into Cuba, she was shocked that she was singled out once again. And she went in front of a guard, and she knew if they opened her suitcase, they would see the Bibles, and she would be in deep trouble. So the guard said, I need you to open your suitcase. And she took the zipper, and she tried to open it, and it opened this much. And it wouldn't budge. She could not get the zipper open. And the guy was frustrated with her, and she was frustrated. She was like, I promise that it works. So he started trying. He couldn't get the zipper open at all. And so finally, in exasperation, he just said, goodbye, leave, go, you're fine. And he never saw the Bibles, and she got to give them out in Cuba. Okay, that's kind of miraculous in a weird sense, because when she got to her hotel, she went to get a knife to open her Bible or open her suitcase, and the zipper just opened. Okay, so God really, really stepped in and made sure that those Bibles were not found. Second story is George and Sarah Clark. They had a ministry for downtrodden men and women. And they were funding this ministry all by themselves, and they got to a point where they just didn't have the money any longer. And they knew in 24 hours they would lose their lease. And so they were very, they didn't know what to do, so they prayed, and they said, God, you are in control of this ministry. If you want it to continue, you have to provide money for us for our lease. And so they prayed, and that night they went to bed. They woke up the next morning to a yard blanketed with white mushrooms. Now, the weird part is that it wasn't even mushroom season. The entire yard was filled with mushrooms. And they went and they cut it all down, and they took it down to the Palmer house and sold it to chefs because they were very rare mushrooms, and they had all the money they needed to make their rent. She said that never, ever happened. No mushrooms were ever seen before or since then. It was just God providing for them in a miraculous way. Bertha Smith is our third story. She, in her biography, she wrote that she went to a primitive village in China because she wanted to share Christ with the Chinese people. But she said when she got there, the place where she stayed was a stall that had an ox and flies. Okay, now this is not how she was raised. She didn't know what to do. So she finally prayed because the flies were so bad she couldn't even eat. And she said, Lord, I am one of your spoiled children. And she said, all my life I've been accustomed to screened houses and clean food. She said, I cannot eat this food with flies all over it. So she said, I remember in Egypt, back in Moses, when how you had flies come and go at your word. So she said, I'm praying for 2 things. Either take the flies away completely, or make it to where I can stomach eating this food with the flies around. And she said, for the next 5 days, not one fly flew into that stall. and she could eat dinner. Okay, these are all just random things that are just little miracles that happened that God just stepped in and made things better. And you and I love to hear stories like that. And I would have felt much better if Stan and Beth's story was like, oh, the tree was coming over and we passed by it and we missed it by 6 inches and God saved us. Like, we love stories like that. We love to hear stories of God jamming zippers and growing mushrooms out of season. And some of you have a story like that. You got the job despite all the odds. The unexpected check just showed up in the mail from the IRS. They forgot it. It's been sitting in their, bin for 10 years, and it finally showed up. The head-on collision. You see the car coming. They're texting. They're not paying any attention. And it's like an angel takes the car and pushes it out of the way to miss you. Some of you went to the doctor and showed that your test, you've been healed. And today we're going to see that kind of a miraculous event. But then we're going to go to the other side of that, where some of you did not get your miracle. The tragedy happened, you're a disaster, life is bad, and we're going to see both sides of that today. So today I want to show you the 3 characters in this story. The first one is Herod. For those of you that remember the story about Jesus at Christmas, since we're doing that right now, when Herod heard that there was a king that was born, he went to, and he tried to get all the kids, it was either under 2, I think it was, he wanted to murder all the boys under 2 in this little town because he didn't want this king that he heard of. So Herod was a very, very ruthless man. He had a son, his name was Antipas, Herod Antipas. He was the one who had John the Baptist beheaded. So we see this, this rage going through the Herod's family. And the man in this particular story is Herod Agrippa. He was the grandson of Herod the Great. We saw a couple weeks ago when Peter went to Caesarea and Cornelius, and suddenly the gospel makes it to all the Gentiles and opens it up. Remember, he was in the Roman guard. So now Herod is stepping in because he sees that this could possibly be a problem, so he's going to get involved. Second character is James. Most of us know James. He is the brother of John. John who wrote the Gospel of John. John who wrote Revelation, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. So this is John. They were in the inner circle of Jesus. You have Peter, James, and John. So you have the 3 top guys in Jesus's inner circle. He was invited to witness events that most people didn't see: the raising of Jairus' daughter from when she died, the transfiguration, Jesus in agony at the Garden of Gethsemane. He saw, the resurrection of Jesus when he rose from the dead. He spent days with him, 40 days after. So James saw a lot. And he was a very, very important part of this early church and its growth. Some of you will remember this, and this is how God is so awesome and how he changes lives. When James was younger with his brother John, they were called the sons of thunder because they were just brash, and they were just, everything about them was, they wanted Jesus to rain down fire on people instead of, and Jesus is like, I didn't come to rain down fire. And then God transformed both of these to loving men who just loved Jesus and loved, everything about him changed, because that's the God that we serve, someone who transforms us from the inside out. But if you remember this scene, this is kind of funny. James and John's mother gets in the scene, and she comes to Jesus and she says this. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down asked a favor. What is it you want, he asked. And she said, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in the kingdom. Now, I think that's kind of amazing that a mom would get involved. In other words, she's saying, hey, if my boys are going to follow you, I need some special treatment here for them. And I wonder if Jesus burst out laughing, serious? But this is what Jesus says. He said, you don't know what you're asking. Jesus said, can you drink the cup I am going to drink? Jesus is about ready to go to the cross, whipped, beaten, scourged, hung on a cross, died, horrible, horrible stuff. And he's saying, are you guys willing to go through what I'm going through? And they said, we can. And Jesus said, you will indeed drink from my cup. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom have been prepared by my Father. The third character is Peter. Most of us know Peter. Peter was brash. He was bold. He has a big mouth. That's just how Peter always was. Peter was also in Jesus' inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He was the one who denied Jesus before, the rooster crowed, that night, that whole thing. And he's the one who did that with Jesus, denied him 3 times. And then when Pentecost happened, after he saw Jesus rise from the dead, then everything changes in Peter's life. His whole life is changed now. He's a main part of this early church. So we're going to start in verse 3, and then we're going to come back to the first 2 verses, because I want you to see this miraculous side. For those of you that got the miracle, this is going to make sense to you. We're picking it up in Acts 12. When he, Herod, saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in his cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up and said, "Get up!" He said, and the chains fell off of Peter's wrist. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals," and Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel said. Peter followed him out of prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through. When they had walked through the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating." And we love stories like that. And the problem with us is we assume if God sent an angel to Peter, then he should automatically send one to us too. And he should make it all better for us. But I want you to see that there's another side to this. And this side is for those of you where your cancer wasn't healed. The loved one ended up dying. The angel was apparently on another call, and that car did hit you. And now you've got bills, medical bills. Your life is just a disaster. The check never showed up in the mail, and you had to file bankruptcy. And once again, you're turned down for the job. And what you and I need to know as followers of Christ is this: we will always struggle to maintain a difficult balance between those two. And the reason for it is because, we said this I think a couple weeks ago, this world is guided by natural laws that God just placed that's the way he made this world. If I jump off the Empire State Building, I'm not going to fly. I'm going to crash onto the ground and splat. That's just the way it's going to be, because that's how God created the laws of this world with gravity. If I stay underwater too long, I'm going to drown. If a tornado or hurricane is set to hit a specific area, because that's how it probably will. If the moon is supposed to rise on Sunday, it will. If the waves in the ocean are never supposed to stop, they never will. That's just how God created this world. But the question is, can God step into what he created and do something amazing? And the answer is yes, he can. And we just saw it in Acts. And many of you have your own story where you've seen God come through. But the question we have to ask is, does he always? And the answer we hate is no, he doesn't. And when he doesn't, we have got to be those kind of Christians that say, you know what? I'm still going to love and trust God. I know he could have stopped the tragedy, but he didn't. But it's not going to affect my faith. So let's see what God didn't stop. We're going to go back to the first 2 verses. Acts 12:1, it was about this time that King Herod arrested some of those who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. And James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. You're like, what? Peter gets out of prison because an angel shows up and gets him out. And yet everyone's probably praying for James too. And James is killed, most likely beheaded by a sword. And we're saying, what is wrong with that picture? Somehow that doesn't seem fair. And my question is this: fair to who? We got to really think about this. Not fair to James? James just died and went to heaven. Why would we think that isn't fair? See, what's so weird to me is that his death gets 1 verse. James died. And James was a big part of this early church, and he was a big part of Jesus' inner circle. And these guys, like James, would be one that everyone else would go to for help, for information. He knew Jesus that well, and yet he died. And you don't even have as much as 5 verses saying we mourned, we were sad, nothing. And I'm like, what is wrong with that whole picture? And I think it's because of this. I think that the Christians really understood what following Jesus was all about. We can't understand that here in the United States, but they understood that then. Here's the deal. They knew exactly what they were getting into. They knew that to follow Christ could possibly cost them everything, and it could actually mean life or death. They walked into knowing Jesus, knowing that that's part of this whole thing. But here's what they focused on. They were focused on the promise of eternity. See, I think they knew, and that's why they only gave him 1 verse, because they knew, you know what? James is gone, miss him, love him, not even minimizing that. For those of you that lost people, please don't hear me say that. But here's the deal. They know they will see him again. It's like we got a lot of work to do. And we are so sad that happened, but let's keep on going because people need to hear about Jesus. We don't understand that thought process because we live in America. But if you were a follower of Jesus, I always say this, in Iran, Iraq, China, you know that following Jesus could possibly cost you your life. And I just thought I would throw this question into you this morning. Would you follow Jesus if you thought you might die? If someone came to you, see, we hear Jesus just wants to make your life happy. And do you want to go to heaven? Ask Jesus in your life and you get a free ticket to heaven. That's what we hear. What they heard was completely different. If you want to follow Jesus, you're going to suffer. You're going to possibly die. Look at what Paul has to say. He said this, he became a Christian. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. Any idea what that would feel like? That's like someone whipping you over and over. What a horrible thing. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I love this. I have labored and toiled, and I have gone without sleep. I've known hunger and thirst, and I've gone without food. I've been cold and naked, and besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. That is more what following Christ is all about. And yet what we see is Paul's not complaining. He's not saying God's not fair to me, and it's just not right that all these bad things are happening to me. He just continues to go on. And you don't see James or anyone really complaining either, because they knew something that will change our life drastically when we get it. Here it is. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. We don't get that here. I don't know why it is, but we are so bent on loving this world. Ted Decker wrote a book called The Slumber of Christianity, Awakening a Passion for Heaven on Earth. And when I was doing this lesson, as I was reading what he had to say, I was thinking, you know what? I think this is why the death of James got 1 verse, and this is why. James wins by dying. See, we don't like to think that way. It's sad for those who are still left on the earth. But they understood something that you and I need to get to live really honestly is Christ. The minute we make our life about Jesus, then we know that to die is gain, because we will spend eternity with him. But the problem is we're so attached to this world. And the reason for it, I think, is because we cannot fathom heaven. Nobody can tell us exactly what it's like. We hear about streets of gold and we think about, Jesus going to make us a home. But it seems a mystery. We don't understand it, especially if you're doing Revelation with us. We see this amazing picture of heaven and what's going on up there, and we can't even fathom it. And so it scares us. And so we hang on to this earth because we don't want to go there because we don't understand it. Brian Jones, in his book, Second Guessing God, his last chapter is called Heaven. He talks about when he used to teach junior high kids, and he went to all the kids one day, and he was talking about heaven, and he said, "What do you think heaven's going to be like, Josh?" And Josh answers this, "I think it's going to be stupid, and I don't want to go there." Now, if we're being honest, I'm assuming that most of us have thought that too. Now, I'm only because we can't picture what it's going to be like. And all we see are pictures of, little angels on harps with harps on clouds, and we're like, that just doesn't work for me, okay? So in our mind, we don't understand it. And I think, what are we going to do all day? And most people think, am I going to be bored? What goes on in heaven? I want to play soccer. I want to watch TV. I want to go on a cruise. I want to go to the ocean. For me, it's I want to work. I want to teach Bible. I want to study. I want to learn about God. All that I won't need to do any of that once we get to heaven, which is awesome. But before we started back, Rob and I we were able to go to Cancun for a week, and he looked at me and he said, why don't you not take your computer? Which means you can't study for 7 days. And I almost had a heart attack, okay? And I said, well, you're really cute, and I do want to sit there and stare at you, but I don't want to stare at you like all day, okay? So let's play cards, and we'll swim and do all the things that we're supposed to do, but I need to bring my computer because that terrifies me to not have something to do. And so when you talk about heaven, you go, what do we do up there? I don't really know. Can I do something? And then people will say, well, you'll just worship God all day. Now, there's no one that loves Jesus more than me. Well, maybe, but I love Jesus. And I'm so grateful for my salvation that I get to go to heaven. And that is worth praising and worshiping God forever. I get that. But I don't understand that here. I can't focus for 15 minutes at church at a worship song. They sing, I'm just like looking around, I'm thinking, what am I have for lunch? And I'm trying, and all these people are raising their hands, and I'm like, I'm the worst Christian in the world. And this just goes on, and I'm like, how can I can't worship for 15 minutes. How am I going to worship for like eternity? I don't understand it. Those are the reasons why I think we don't really deal with heaven very well. Brian was so shocked that he finally asked Josh, Josh, what is your deal on this? And he said, what makes heaven so great? Here's what Brian said. As I stumbled for a fitting response, he said, the students sitting there that morning saw right through me. Everyone knew that Josh had stumped the teacher. It wasn't that I didn't know most of the correct theological answers. I just hadn't lived long enough to believe them myself. There was no longing in my voice to show my students that I looked forward to going to heaven after my bumbling response having appeared a lot like Josh had described it. It was 20 years ago. A lot has happened since then, so I'm going to take a do-over and take one more shot at answering it. And what we're going to talk about for the rest of this time that we have together is how awesome heaven will be because of the things that heaven will not have in it. We are so used to the bad things happening. We are so used to turning on the news and seeing terrorism and seeing car crashes and seeing, bad things happening to children and all of these things happen. We just think it's normal. And yet what we have to remember that the bad stuff shouldn't be normal. You're going to never, ever come back to Bible study when I tell you this, and you would be right to not. But I realized this when we went to Flagstaff. The kids were getting ready to come up, and how many of us are immune to I-17 in that road, and how many accidents are on that stupid road getting to Flagstaff? And we're there, we're waiting for our kids, and one of them called and said, yeah, there's an accident. It'll be hours before we get there. Not once did I even stop and think to pray for the people who were in the accident. I'm just more annoyed. I just want the accident. Hurry up, clear the accident because I need my kids up in Flagstaff. I should go to hell for that, honestly. Like, that's the worst thing in the whole world. And I thought, what is wrong with me? Why didn't it even occur to me my first thing to pray for those people who were in the accident? And I realized that it's because we are so immune to bad stuff. We just think it's normal. Here's what we know. We forget that the bad stuff shouldn't be normal. Here's the good thing about heaven. It's maybe normal for this earth, but never, ever normal for heaven. Here's what we need to know as we're living on this earth. Romans 8:22 says this, for we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. We have to realize that bad things happen in this world because the earth is groaning. God never created it that way. He created it to be perfect. But then when sin came into the world and it snowballed, and that's why sin just has a heyday now. Here's my question. Why are we so attached to a world that's groaning and our bodies are aching? I sat down the other night to staple those lessons, and I couldn't even hardly get up. Okay, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like everything's aches, and it's hard to stand up and to get out of bed and walk. I'm just like, what's wrong? The world is groaning, and things are just changing. So I want to take the rest of the time and say why the early Christians only gave one verse about James. And I think it's because they knew something. They knew that James got the best end of the deal. So let's talk for a few minutes about what heaven won't have. And maybe we'll get a little more excited. Here's what it won't have: divorce. There's no divorce in heaven. Everyone here has a horror divorce story, whether it's you, your parents, your friends, your neighbors. I tell you this joke all the time, but it works really good here. A father was sitting in his chair, realized it was his daughter's birthday, forgot to get her a gift, so he went to the local department store. I think I even told you this joke like 3 weeks ago, but it fits here. He asked the clerk how much a Barbie doll was, and she said, well, they range in prices. The beauty queen Barbie is $30, and the nurse Barbie is $20, but the divorced Barbie is $265. He said, why is divorced Barbie so expensive? And he said, well, it's the only one that comes with Ken's house, Ken's car, Ken's boat, okay? Okay, which makes total sense, but here is the good news. In heaven, even Ken and Barbie can't get divorced, okay? It's not going to happen there. Maybe some of you are still reeling from your parents' divorce. You remember that day when they walked in and said, hey, Mom and I are splitting up, and your entire world was just rocked. For those of you that know my husband's testimony, before he became a Christian, he was married twice before. Our 7 kids, 2 of those, the 2 oldest, come from different women. So we got into marriage with 2 ex-wives and 2 children that, and Gabby we'd gotten custody of right away, but Robbie we didn't, and his mom would not let him live with us. And he was 6, and it was so devastating to watch him. He would come to our house and he would say, I don't want to go home. I want us to live here with you and Dad. And she wouldn't let him. And this caused so much heartache to him and to us. There was nothing we could do about it. So we ended up taking him to school early on Monday morning instead of dropping him off Sunday night. So it would give him 8 hours to acclimate back into the system before he would have to go back home to her. And it was a very, very difficult situation. And it was sad and heartbreaking. But here's what you need to know is that that's at this earth right now, but this world is groaning. And we live in a world where heartache happens because of divorce. But you know what? In heaven, there's nothing like that. It's going to be so awesome. There are really no tears and frustration and bitterness and jealousy and anger for those of you that have been divorced. Not ever happening. Here's the next thing heaven won't have. Racism. I don't know what happened to my little slide. I had a slide that said racism, but anyway. Here's the deal. All you have to do is turn on the news and see what racism has done to this world. Jesse Duplantis says this, we were all made out of dirt. Look at that. God makes dirt, but he makes it all different colors. You have dark and light and orange and gray and all these different colors of dirt that God has made. He said, wouldn't it be odd to listen to 2 different clumps of dirt talking, like the 2 bottom ones talking to each other, and one clump saying, I'm better than you? We're both dirt. We're just different colors. What's the problem with that? But that's the problem. We don't understand that God created us all out of the ground, and so we all come in different colors. So what? That's how God created. It's so sad, racism. I read this, and it actually made me laugh, and I felt bad because this was just a time period. Back when steamships were around, back in the days of steamships, it was only meant for rich, white people. And one day while sailing, something happened to the ship, and it was about ready to go over, and they didn't know what to do. So someone said, maybe we should do what the black people do, which is pray, because they're good at praying, and rich white people never pray. And so they didn't know what to do, so they called on John, the black cook of the ship, and asked him to come up and pray. He started like this. He said, Lord, on the day of hunger, I went to a restaurant to get something to eat, and the sign said, for whites only. He said, I went to a water fountain to get water, and the sign said, for whites only. Then, Lord, I went to the restroom, and the sign said, for whites only. He said, God, I know that this isn't very Christian-like, and please forgive me, but when this ship sinks, let it be for whites only. Okay? I can't even imagine living in a world like that where it's like you're so segregated. And because because what the world is groaning. That's what happens, but there's none of that in heaven. Look at this. Revelation 5:9, we see this great scene in heaven. And they sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the book and break its seals, for you were slain and purchased for God with your blood from every tribe and tongue and people and nation." When we get to heaven, it is going to be amazing. You're not going to be color. It's no racism, none of that. It's all going to be just people from all over this world worshiping God. But for right now, this world is groaning. Here's the next thing that we're not going to see in heaven. There's going to be no handicap signs. Brian tells a really funny story, which ended up not being very funny. But he said it was a valuable lesson he learned. He took his family to Disneyland, Epcot Center. And he said they got inside the park and then realized they were told they can't take their stroller in. And he said at this time it was 99 degrees. They had an 8-month-old who was 30 pounds. He said, I am not carrying her around all day long. So he goes to the office and explains that he can't carry his daughter around the whole time. And she said, well, does your daughter have a medical condition? Because that's the only way you can take your stroller in. So he said, I paused. And he said, I started thinking. My wheels started turning. He said, I was desperate. I was sweaty. He said, I was stupid. I anticipated back surgery if I actually had to carry my 30-pound daughter. And he said, so I looked outside, saw all my daughters jumping, excitement for going. So he looked at the lady and he said, she has FBS syndrome. And she said, well, why didn't you tell me that when you came in? And he said, well, it's because it's just kind of rare and I don't like to make a big deal about it. And she said, all right. So she said, gave him a pass to go into the, handicapped, access through the whole day because his daughter had FBS syndrome. He gets outside and his wife said, what does FBS mean? And he said, fat baby syndrome. Okay. And he said, so all that day we rode all the rides through the handicapped access. But he said, I knew God was teaching me something really valuable. He said, as I started to look around, I started to notice all the people that I was in line with. Mentally challenged children in wheelchairs, adults with cerebral palsy, kids on ventilators. He said one boy needed 3 Epcot workers just to load his wheelchair onto a ramp. He said for 12 hours, ride after ride, he said, I was given a front row seat to the painful lives of the physically broken. Here's what you need to know about heaven. Heaven will be a day of liberation. There are no ventilators in heaven, no handicapped access ramps, no beds with rails, no one needing to bathe someone else, no one to feed someone else, wheelchair someone else, write for them, or hold the phone. But for now, this world is groaning. Here's another thing that you won't have in heaven. Parents dying. Some of you have lost parents and you love them so desperately. But in heaven, we won't ever have to go through that kind of a pain anymore. We have a friend, some of you know, Connie, who just lost her husband quite a few months back. And he went to the doctor. The doctor gave him a clean bill of health. And 2 days later, he's riding in the dunes. He's like 50 and he's riding there. And he dies of a heart attack. And it was so devastating. And Connie hears a knock on the door and goes there, and there's a police officer saying, I'm sorry, your husband's dead. And she's like, what? And now my 2 boys, they're going to go, their father dies, and now they won't be able to have a dad at their wedding or see their babies. Like the heartache that brings. Revelation 2:4 says this, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death. There will be no longer any mourning or crying or pain because the first things have passed away. This groaning earth will pass away. Here's our last thing that heaven won't have. Babies dying. Some of you have lost children, grandchildren, babies at birth, babies through miscarriage. When Rob and I first got married, we had best friends. And she was trying to get pregnant. I was trying to get pregnant. She got pregnant before me. I was devastated because I didn't think I could have kids at that time. A couple months later, I ended up getting pregnant. We each had a son at that point. Then we both got pregnant at the same time the second time. She goes in for delivery. I am 9 months pregnant. She goes in to deliver her baby, Jacob, and she has him, and we go, oh, he's so cute and all that stuff. The next day I go to see her, and she said, Jacob's going to die. And I'm like, what? She's like, he has this really weird, rare disease, and he died. And here I am in the elevator, like when I was going over this lesson, I literally started crying. I remember being in the elevator and just sobbing. And here I am 9 months pregnant with a very healthy Jesse. And their Jacob dies. And I can't even imagine the pain and the heartache that they had to go. Nothing prepares you for that. We had a babysitter that always watched our kids, and for 10 years, and then someone asked me one day, hey, do you have a babysitter? And I'm like, yeah, I have the greatest babysitter. So they took their grandson over there to watch him for a few hours. She puts him down like she did all of our kids. She went back to get him, and he had died of SIDS. Nothing can prepare you for that either. And yet what I want you to know is in heaven, nothing will be like that. There will never be heartache and sadness and none of that. Right now there is, because this world is groaning. For some of you, it's none of those things, but it's shame. You cannot get past your past. You did something so horrible, and you can't forgive yourself, and you can't move on. And God's saying, stop. First come to Jesus. He takes all that away from you. But you're living with this shame, and what you need to know is that there's no shame in heaven. Your memory's wiped clean. Imagine being in heaven and never feeling regret over something you did in your past. Here's a list of other stuff not in heaven. No abuse, no sex trafficking, no pornography, no drug addiction, no alcoholics, no unforgiveness, no bitterness, no hatred, no financial worries, no working 3 jobs to make ends meet, no fighting with your spouse, no watching your kids destroy themselves. There's one for you. No elections, okay? Woo! There will be no bombs, no jihad, no terrorism, no car accidents, no plane crashes, no mental illness, no cancer, no tsunamis, no earthquakes, no hurricanes, no tornadoes, no fires. Why would we not want to go to a place that doesn't have those things, okay? Rob was reading a news article, and there was this child who their house went on fire, and 2 kids he could rescue out, but the other 6 he couldn't get out. Imagine, this is a world that is groaning and groaning and groaning, and honestly, this list could go on. That is the world that we live in right now. So why in the world are we so attached to this, and why when we hear that James died, are we so devastated? Because somehow we think that living on this earth is so much better. Heaven is a place where there's all good and no bad. We have a home that God is going to build for us. There's no tears. We spend eternity overwhelmed that God saved us, that we can go to this place forever and ever and ever. There will be no need for light. We will have new bodies. For those of you that have sick bodies and broken parts, you'll get a brand new body. And I say this, peanut M&Ms and Dr. Pepper will have no calories. And they will be in heaven considered good for you. It'll be like, do you want fruits or vegetables or peanut M&Ms? No, peanut M&Ms, they're better for you. See, I think that it's an upside down world in heaven, I think. And then you're going to know the people that knew Jesus and were up on, that we loved on earth. Some of you are here and you say, but Lisa, I don't like to hear stuff like this because I love my life. And I love my children and my grandchildren and my husband. But remember, when you become a follower of Christ, it's to live for Christ. And when you live for Christ, you're telling your children and your grandchildren and your husband and your friends what it means to go to heaven. Imagine eternity with them forever without living on this earth that is groaning. The bottom line for today is this. Life is filled with tragedies and heartaches. It just is because this world is groaning. But just like Job, sometimes God does not step in and stop things. He doesn't stop the car accident. He doesn't stop the death at an early age. And just like Job, I want us to get to the point where we can say, I'm going to accept the good and the bad, knowing that God always, always has a purpose for what you are going through at this particular time. And sometimes, like James, people are going to die at an early age. And sometimes, like John, his brother John, dies in his late 90s. I think he died a natural death. And James gets beheaded and John doesn't. And you're like, what? And maybe we have it all backwards. Maybe honestly, James does win by dying. And some of you say, but I'm afraid to die, Lisa. I'm terrified of what's beyond there. We have a friend who was young and had 2 kids and a lovely wife, and he had an asthma attack. And he literally had one of those experiences where he died and went to heaven. And he got to heaven and saw myriads upon myriads of angels. And he said it was beyond anything he could ever even imagine. And someone came to him and said, you have to go back. And he said, I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back. Okay? And he didn't even see he just saw angels. And he loved his wife and his kids. And nothing would ever separate him from them except heaven. And when he got there, he's like, nope, I don't ever want to go back to that place because that place is groaning. I wanted to end this today by taking it back to James. I think the early Christians understood, and that's why they passed over his death in one verse, that once again, to live as Christ and to die as gain. Think about James's life. At this particular time in Rome, if you were a Christian and you got caught, Nero would come along, capture you, stick you up on a pole, and light you on fire. And he lit the whole city with Christians on fire. These Christians were running for their life. They're persecuted. We just saw what Paul went through. And James doesn't have to do that anymore. But Peter and the rest of the disciples do. James's death, which we've all been taught to think is a bad thing, like, oh, it's so bad that he died. And Peter getting rescued by an angel, we say, oh, that's such a good thing. We need to know that either way is a God thing. Always remember that. Either way is a God thing. God has never, ever come off of his throne, and he knows exactly what he's doing in your life. But knowing the earth is growing and knowing our bodies are wearing out, maybe honestly Peter's the one who got the raw end of the deal. He was stuck here. He ended up going through all the heartache and dying on a cross, crucified like Jesus, upside down. He's stuck on earth where all this bad stuff is happening while the earth is groaning. And James gets to go to heaven. But here's what we need to leave today knowing. Peter knew this. God did not take Peter home. He took James home. And if God left Peter here, that means there's still work to be done. And the same is true for you and I. Life is tough and we live in a groaning world. But if you are a follower of Jesus, there's always a purpose in your pain. God wants to take your life and do something amazing with it. I want us to leave today, and I want us to be more like Job and like Peter. That no matter whatever happens in your life, whether you get the miracle or not, to always say, God is in it. And if you are here or you're watching us any way you found us and you do not know anything what I'm even talking about, you need Jesus. And you need a relationship with him that says, God, my life is a disaster. Come into my life and change me. And get a Bible and pick it up and start going to church and filling your minds with the things of God, and he will change you just like he changed James and John, from sons of thunder to people who love God and are loving and kind. That's my prayer. Have a really good Christmas. We'll pray. Father, thank you for this lesson today. God, help us to be excited for heaven, to be excited that you have a place for us for all eternity. God, my heart breaks for those that don't know you because they don't get to look forward to that. Their eternity is spent somewhere far, far worse and terrifying for all of eternity. God, if there is anyone here or watching us that doesn't know you, I pray today is the day they say, Jesus, come in my life and change me. God, that is what this study is about. That's all that matters to us, is that people come to know you and grow in their faith because you're the one who gives us peace and all the things we need in a world that is groaning. For those, God, that are going through this tough season, I pray that you give them everything that they need for this particular Christmas season. But God, help us to focus on you and remember to live as you, is all about you, and to die as gain. Thank you, Jesus, for giving us those chances to give our life to you so we can spend eternity in a place that never groans, that is only about love and happiness. We're so appreciative of you dying on the cross for us. In Jesus' name, amen.